Uh, so this is the decision-making meeting of the executive member covering regulatory services and licensing, land and property, and also contracting, procurement and social value. Welcome to everybody today. Um, we've just got the one item on the agenda today. Grateful for officers setting this up. And we've got housing officers. We've got Assistant Director Mark Aspin. One of his subjects that he covers is housing. Very grateful for you attending. Uh, this is if councillors haven't met officers before. And John Powell, who is the head of housing for Bolton Council. Thank you very much for coming on this. And the decision paper before me today is for housing for homeless persons. It's renewal of leases and also some new leases. Well, is it Andrew Williamson? Are you want to open this and speak to this paper? Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Councillor. Good morning, everybody. So I'll provide a very brief introduction and then I'll pass over to Mark to talk through the detail of the report. So this is a report, although it's in support of the adult service, it's a matter of property, relating to property, and it's one of the occasions where we're seeking an approval, councillor, relating to becoming a tenant of property as opposed to landlord of property. And it's really in support of some very key sort of management of demand and supply services to help accommodation, particularly for the homeless in the borough of Bolton. So I'm going to pass over to Mark to go through the detail of the report, and I'd be happy to help with any questions at the end.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Councillor. So the report circulated summarises a request to extend existing leases and add some further properties to that lease from Bolton at Home for use as temporary accommodation, as Andrew's alluded to. So Bolton Council has legal responsibilities to provide temporary accommodation for homeless households under Part 7 of the Housing Act 1996, specifically those that are owed what is referred to as a main duty. So households with children, people previously supported through the care system, victims of domestic abuse, and other persons with health and social needs that may make them more vulnerable should they become homeless. Over the last 18 months, there's been growing pressure to provide homelessness assistance, with that reaching pretty unprecedented levels locally over the last 12 months, and much of that is referred to within the report. We've currently got, certainly at the end of the last month, up to 50 families being accommodated in chain hotels, which is essentially, from our perspective, the kind of worst case scenario of emergency accommodation, because it comes at a significant cost, while our wider portfolio of temporary accommodation is regularly full. As part of our wider plans to mitigate current demand, we're looking to maintain existing leases on properties we currently use, supplied through Bolton at Home, as referred to, and expand this by a further 13 properties, which will be added to our portfolio subject to your approval. The additional properties are to be added on the same terms, which is the equivalent of social rent applicable for each property. And this is below the usual market rent value for their private sector equivalent, which is important. It is proposed that the leases are granted for a term of 17 years, which brings them in line with existing leases for other properties also let from Bolton at Home. This does incur stamp duty charges due to the length of lease, as referred to in the report under section 2.5. However, this is required so that the authority can recover the full housing benefit subsidy through tenants, which would otherwise be restricted to 90% of the 2011 rate, and that represents a significant saving to the council. The alternative to this approach is to further increase the use of chain hotels, as alluded to, based on predicted demand, which could cost the council an estimated £1.3 million further a year, and risk that families could remain in hotels longer than the 6-week statutory limit, which is placed on councils, which would therefore put us at risk of challenge. The options are detailed in section 3 of this report. Option 1 is to approve the 35 lease renewals and approve the new 13 properties as an additional units of temporary accommodation, or option 2, do not approve the lease renewals or the additional units and essentially hand back those properties to Bolton at Home. The financial impact of those options are highlighted in section 4. The maximum cost of the local authority of option 1, which is the recommended option, is £250,000 per annum, but as noted, the significant majority of this cost is recoverable through the housing benefits arrangements. There is a one-off stamp duty charge, as mentioned, of £138,000. The recommendations of the report are to authorise the Assistant Director of Community Safety and Housing to negotiate and agree the renewal of 35 leases which have expired or essentially have been on holdover, and also add further 13 properties to that lease arrangement so we can add those to our temporary accommodation portfolio, and to also authorise the Borough Solicitor to carry out any legal formalities. I'm happy with colleagues to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mark. I know there's hands up. So for me, if you just clarify for me, you feel like it was fairly speedy, the use of hotels went up, and you feel for our council, you're really getting on top of this, perhaps if you think about the position that other councils are in. Can you say anything about that for me?
Yeah, so certainly Bolton's in actually a really strong position and has been for some time compared to some of the authorities around us who are spending significant amounts on hotel accommodation. I think if we use Manchester as a reference point, I think their bill up until recently was upwards of 7 million. So there is significant cost implications of doing this differently. I think that said, the demand that has been presented to Bolton for a number of different factors, not least of which the cost of living crisis, etc., has meant that we have seen a quite significant and rapid rise in requirements to use hotel, and particularly chain hotel placements. So when I first arrived in September, we were pretty much in single figures, maybe heading towards double figures. That has quickly risen to upwards of 50, as alluded to, which was the case certainly in up to kind of May, June period. There's been a slight drop off recently as other mechanisms have come into place, which has helped us mitigate that, but it's certainly still at a high level. And this will be another part of our kind of portfolio of arrangements that are looking at mitigating this challenge, and will put will place us in a much stronger position than we are at the minute to mitigate the future use of chain hotels too, and the cost savings that go with that.
Well, that's very good, considering the pressures that you all work with in housing and working together as officers with the different specialisms. I'm very reassured that you're getting on top of this and it's not been left. David Grant, please, Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few questions and a comment, if I may. Is this not creating an ever decreasing circle? So we're taking 13 new properties out of Bolton at home stock to have our temporary stock. That means 13 families will not be able to be permanently homed in those. So that could mean, as evictions come forward, Bolton at home have even less stock, so then we'll require extra housing. Are we not creating a rod for our own backs? That's my first question. We will still have 35 families in hotels costing us an extortionate amount of money. And, is this now not the time to revisit the fact that we should really be building our own social homes instead of relying on third parties? I had this conversation with the leader yesterday, and I'm going off the new government as well, saying they want to build houses, etc. We give Bolton at home a very discounted rate on land when we're disposing of our land. For them to build some social housing, or not really, but affordable housing and rent to buy schemes. Should we not be using our own land to build our own social housing, building our own housing stock up again, so that we can better accommodate these? Because the numbers are staggering, really. I mean, it doesn't seem too much, 259,000 for the leases, but then you add in there the hotels that we still got. You could probably build about 10 to 15 houses a year with that money on our own land, because we won't be purchasing the land. We give ourselves planning permission. We don't have to need, I just think we need to start thinking a little bit outside the box to fix this problem. And it's not, I don't think it's hard. Those are my comments. My main concern is that we're taking stock away from a social housing provider. And whilst it temporarily improves our position by 13 families, I think we will get another 13 families at the back end, because there won't be the social housing to accommodate them. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, David. I'll let the officers answer that first. Anybody want to give a view?
I can start if that's okay,
Yeah,
and maybe
yeah,
John and Andrew can also add. No, we do acknowledge the risk and the challenge of the fact that we're kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul a little bit, is it on face value? But the you know on the positive news on that is that we are taking account of that through other mechanisms. So John has very skillfully negotiated with some providers to increase the nominations that are available to us through the Homes for Bolton system to essentially hopefully increase at least slightly the number of properties that are made available to people to be able to access through that arrangement. We're also in a position where we've got separate programs looking at bringing more, for example, the properties that Bolton at Home have that are currently not able to be used because of their condition and are at risk of being sold off through grants that we've applied to for government. In fact, the only delay that we've got on that is the fact that obviously the change in politics and the change in government has meant that decision hasn't been taken as quickly as we were hoping it would do. And so again, we're hoping that when that comes through, we're in a position to bring more properties back into use, and they will be made available for that purpose too. Again, on some of the points that you make, again, these are things that we are looking at. There is no new strategic housing board with a number of key representatives, to include people on this call, taking a look at all the options available to us and all the elements of housing and the land acquisition that sit around that, so we can make sure that we're all pulling in the same direction, recognizing how important it is that we build social and affordable homes within Bolton that will help us essentially move from the position that we find ourselves in now into a position where we aren't having to respond with emergency measures. So there's a lot of work going on in the background to get us there as quickly as it can, including in reference to the points that you raised.
Yeah, I'm going to bring John in a minute. I think, David, you were almost intimating that why doesn't the council want to consider going into the business of being a landlord again? And I think that might be something that's picked up at your leaders' meetings or picked up at housing. You know, there's an exec cabinet member for housing, because that would be quite a significant policy change for the council, of course. Okay, John Powell, thank you.
Yeah, of course, we've got to recognise we're on the horns of what is not just a local issue, but a national housing crisis. And the key issues around that, around availability and affordability, are the two key issues. And if I just sort of allow me the opportunity just to give you a few key figures. So sort of back in 2018-19, pre-COVID, we would have around 2,000 social housing lets coming through annually, and they would attract around 90,000 expressions of interest, just over 45 expressions of interest per property. We're now in a position where we're probably seeing about 950 social housing units come through for advertisement, and they're now averaging in excess of 350 expressions of interest per property. Okay, so that is a huge change in sort of demand. And again, the backdrop around affordability, some sort of key routes into that in terms of presentations around homelessness, ending of Section 21's private rented accommodation, major increases in private rented rents. I'm sure that won't have escaped your attention. And Bolton in the last couple of years has had the highest rate of increase, along with, I think, Glasgow nationally, not just locally, but nationally, one of the highest rates of rental increases. So obviously allied with that, the LHA rates were until relatively recently pinned they've been sort of stalled for a period, and they've now been put back to 30th percentile, but that's based on rents in 2023, not 2024. But in that period, local private rented rents have increased in excess of 15% over that period as well. So again, the problem and the dilemma we have as a local authority is we will prevent it. And we're actually very successful at preventing homelessness, and in comparison to other authorities, we have a relatively high proportion of people we manage to assist and secure alternative private rented accommodation compared to others. Yeah. We're maintaining, and even though Bolton Council made a decision well over a decade ago to transfer its housing stock, we've still maintained a very proactive partnership with BCH Partners and secure a very high proportion of those lets to assist homeless households. And compared to other boroughs, I know Mark's come from Blackburn last year, and I know the situation around accessing social housing in a stock transport authority in Blackburn, that was incredibly vexed in some areas, and we've actually managed to maintain that position. But the bottom line, if we have a homeless household, we need to accommodate, and there are challenges obviously around the bed and breakfast limit, 6 weeks. You know, we need to make sure we're the right side of legality. When we're looking at sort of costs and volume of households we do have in temporary accommodation, when we look across the piece and compare ourselves to a basket of authorities, some authorities like Oldham, Rochdale, Wigan, and some of those other larger authorities, again, we're doing comparatively well. I know it's a degree of how far in difficulty you are, but we're probably not quite as far in that because we've been very, very proactive at trying to get ahead of the game that has been overtaking many authorities. And in terms of, I know colleagues in Rochdale, for example, are just in the process of signing off. I understand a subsidy loss on temporary accommodation in excess of 3 million. We've managed, myself and Mark and the team have managed to manage that within our budget without placing that wider burden on the corporate centre. So I think that's just a bit of context. No easy answers, and obviously Mark is obviously taking forward that discussion around provider status potentially, and whether we can explore that further. But again, obviously that's a wider policy decision for members. Susan. So
thank you.
Thank you for allowing me some time just to explain that. Thank you.
Really appreciate that update. Maureen, Councillor Flitcroft.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to get a bit of background on these properties, if that's okay. Are we responsible for the repair and maintenance of these properties, or would it still be Bolton at Home? Also, do they come furnished? And what length of time do people stay in these properties? What's the turnover? If anybody can give me that information.
Take that one on, Mark.
Yeah, you can, John. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Again, there's sort of the split in terms of the heads of terms. There's what they call the demise. So the basic fabric of the building, the water tightness, the windows, doors, and all that kind of fundamental aspects of the building would remain the responsibility of Bolton at Home as they would for any other tenant. But obviously some sort of minor repairs, decoration, those kind of things. And obviously if there's any internal damage to the property caused by anybody we place there, they would sit with our responsibility. Okay, in terms of the inventory and furnishings and white goods, that remains the responsibility of the council. But obviously with the length of these leases and the arrangement this puts us into, we are able to recover a significant proportion of that cost through the housing benefit charges, eligible charges. So does that answer that question?
Sorry, I couldn't find my microphone.
No,
Yeah, it does. And then it's just how long do people stay in these properties?
Okay. Yeah, apologies. Now, obviously, again, just referring back to the sort of pre-COVID position, if you take the example across these dispersed properties, pre-COVID, we were probably turning these units around, on average, around sort of every 3 to 4 months. That is now getting on more towards sort of 6 to 9 months. And that is primarily a function of our ability to access affordable move on accommodation. That's the sort of primary issue. And again, there's other challenges in terms of sort of the pressures of demand, as Mark's clearly sort of talked to as well.
So the higher allocation from Bolton at Home for these residents to
You've just gone on mute.
Sorry. So
no problem.
The increased allocation that you're hoping to negotiate from Bolton at Home for these tenants to apply for a permanent home, that would help with that turnover, wouldn't it?
Well, we do relatively well in terms of the proportion of social housing lets. All the BCH partners put the majority of their stock through choice-based lettings and through our sort of collected allocation scheme called Home to Bolton. Now, in a lot of boroughs, they don't have that commitment from stock transfer or other social providers. So that is something that we've been really on top of over the last sort of decade and 15 years and longer to maintain the Bolton Community Homes Partnership and a commitment to that. There are challenges there because obviously, as I'd said before, the overall turnover and throughput of social housing lets us drop markedly. and the demand for those has increased hugely. So that remains a challenge, but relatively we're doing okay. But yes, we could do with more affordable social housing and more affordable private rented accommodation, absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Susan Priest, Councillor Priest.
Thank you. I'm well aware of the shortage of housing stock, and for months now I've been trying to get a figure out of Bolton at Home about their voids and empties and their turnaround times. I really think this is something that we should be looking at. I can't get an answer out of them. It is something I keep raising, and I'm about to raise it again, along with a number of other issues. So I do honestly feel that we could increase the amount of stock if we got on top of Bolton at Home's turnaround times. I don't know how you feel about it.
Anybody want to give a view? I mean, I'm grateful that councillors do get updates from Bolton at Home. We perhaps need them a bit more regularly from now on. Mark?
Yeah, I think we work very closely with Bolton at Home, and we recognise some of the challenges that they currently have. I think some of those relate to stock quality. There's a lot of requirements of the new regulator that's been placed on them to make sure that the quality's up to the relevant standard, and that's definitely affected the number of properties that they've got concurrently available, and the number that are in a kind of backlog really for refurbishment work, etc. Some of which is so costly that they're having to dispose of them. Yeah, we welcome, and we have regular conversations with Bolton at Home over their stock and our ability to access it, to include those that are currently unavailable to us.
Okay. John, do you want to add?
And I could just add to that. I mean, Bolton at Home and Bolton Council stock transfer, because of course it was the council stock transfer, was a very late stock transfer in the whole stock transfer sort of game, as it were, and didn't benefit. Bolton Home did not benefit from the level of central government investment in stock transfer properties as some of the earlier stock transfers had. So I think historically they've got quite a high proportion of relatively old properties with some significant structural issues. They were relatively recently, last year, relatively successful in a bid to some monies routed from central government through GMCA around addressing damp and mould. But obviously it's a bit of a drop in the ocean in terms of the overall stock quality condition that Mark's alluded to and the work that's necessary. But I couldn't speak to the detail that sits within Bolton Home, the overall stock condition, but I think generally they've got some real challenges there.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'd be grateful then, Susan, if you put the request in, maybe to Democratic Services, about when we have briefings from them, if that voids issue can go on again, so everybody can get an update. The councillors, all of us can get an update on that, what might be slowing things down, and there might be some good explanations about we've had some explanations before, I remember, about what happens when property is just, they can't let it because of problems sometimes with previous tenants, and they've done quite a run through of that for us. But I'd be grateful if you could press for that to go on again. I think there's a lot of councillors who want to know what's going on in housing.
Yeah, because I think it's the number of voids and empties are quite visible. And whilst I do appreciate it, certainly the housing stock around us is certainly old, and I do appreciate that. But it's really a question of, before we get into Councillor Grant's arguments about building new housing, what can we do with the housing stock we've got better than we're doing at the moment? And if the answer is we can't, then maybe we should go with Councillor Grant and say, right, okay, we should start building new and cut our losses. But I'm not satisfied yet that some of these housing stock cannot be turned around a lot quicker than it is, and I think that's the major question.
Thank you. Well, I'm grateful for all the comments today, because they all relate to the fact that property may be asked to put together leases, so the council will end up as a tenant perhaps furthermore in the future. So the first thing I want to say is I think the paper's been great, because these meetings, we know, are for the public to view if they want to, when they look at the papers. And for me, it was really well set out. I thought all the explanatory information about the different matters that somebody needs to understand as to why we're going for leases that are this length, I won't rehearse what the officers have said because they did run through everything, the stamp duty issues, the how we want to get the best value for money arrangements. I'm really pleased about that. We've touched on the fact that homelessness here in Bolton is very much affected by the cost of living crisis. I think it would be wrong if I didn't mention that, because many in Bolton mention it, that there was a budget, a small budget in about September 2022, and we know that mortgages went up. We know that probably, I think it was John that mentioned the issues with Section 21 notices that are served, eviction notices that get served on rented persons, and landlords who had to struggle, if you like, with big increases in the cost of their mortgages and so on. So that's definitely had an impact. I've already I asked the officers about that. I won't talk about that again, about the fact that they're doing so well managing the need for hotel use and so on. And I think it's been clear on this call that it's the specialism of property officers who do the lease work as to why this is joint work between property officers and housing. And I just want to acknowledge again, if nobody minds, housing is a standout issue at this council. It is a highly pressurised area. Sure, we've got pressures in some of our other areas, particularly about people, but for me, this is a critical and standout area. We have people attending the one-stop shop on a daily basis who are struggling, and I can't do anything other than praise everybody at Bolton Council who is involved in housing and who is involved in the other services like property, in coming to solutions so that Bolton Council can fulfil at its best its statutory duties to everybody who needs a roof over their head. So, you know, that is to give all of our thanks to those that have worked in housing for, you know, for the years that they have and that they serve this council very well, and we're very grateful. And the decision I need to take today is on the front, and the executive member recommended to authorise the Assistant Director, Community Safety and Housing to negotiate and agree the renewal of 35 leases, which have expired on heads of terms as agreed with Bolton at Home Limited. We talked about the heads of terms. And then in addition, conclude leases, new leases for 13 additional units of temporary accommodation on those same heads of terms as agreed with Bolton at Home Limited. And also, I authorise the Borough Solicitor to carry out all the legal formalities. Thanks very much for attending the meeting today. Much appreciated. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll just stop the recording.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thanks.
Just a minute, I haven't stopped it yet. I don't know what's happening here. Okay, it stopped. Thank you.